Alright guys, let's understand middlewares with some real world examples. This video is for you if you weren't able to understand middlewares last week. Let's start with a very basic example. Let's say in the real world, there is an amusement park and there's a very fancy ride there. There's a very long line in front of that fancy ride. There is also a ticket checker in front of the fancy ride. So whoever is trying to access the ride, whoever is in the line here will first have to go through the ticket checker, get their ticket verified, and only then will they be able to proceed if they have bought a legitimate ticket for that day. Let's say there's a erroneous person in here, person who does not have a ticket. So how would the flow go? First person goes here, does the ride. Second person goes here, does the ride. Third person reaches here, and then this guy doesn't have the ticket. What will the ticket checker do? Ticket checker will kick them out. Until now, the ticket checker let a few people in, but at this point, he'll kick them out, and then the rest of the people will keep on proceeding. This ticket checker is what's called a middleware. A person sitting in the middle of your end client and the final ride that you're trying to access, doing certain checks, making sure only people who have some legitimate access can go through, are known as middlewares. That's one aspect of middlewares. Let's look at the official definition. Using middlewares. Express is a routing and middleware web framework that has minimal functionality of its own. An Express application is essentially a series of middleware function calls. What does this mean? It basically means Express is very minimalistic. It's not meant to be a framework. It's a very small thing. It's just a bunch of middlewares chained one after the other. For example, here the ticket checker is a middleware, and according to Express's definition, even the amusement park is a middleware. Everything that you see here can technically be called a middleware. You could also call this the route handler because this is the last thing that the user wants to access. But technically, this is also a middleware. This is also a middleware, even though, yes, this does not lie in the middle. This lies in the end. Still, what does Express say? An Express application is essentially a series of middleware function calls, which means even the last thing is actually a middleware only. Middleware functions are functions that have access to the request object, the response object, and the next middleware function in the application's request response cycle. The important thing to note here is the request response cycle, which basically means that whenever someone's coming, they are sending a request. I want to access the amusement park. They're going through a full cycle. They're first going through the ticket checker. Things are not fine. They're getting kicked out. If things are fine, they're going here. They're actually doing the ride and then going back home. This is the cycle of a request. Where exactly is it going? It's going through a bunch of checks to finally, get a certain outcome out. Middleware functions can perform the following tasks: execute any code, make any changes to the request and response object, end the request response cycle, and call the next middleware function in the stack. So ये चीज we'll see very soon. But at a high level, yes, this is technically true. Every middleware will do one of two things. It will either stop the end cycle right here. You are not allowed to flow through. It will stop the request right here, or it will pass it on to the next guy, or it will execute some code here, or what was the fourth thing? It will make changes to the request and response objects. This one's little unclear at the moment. As we get into authentication and create our first authentication middleware, you will understand the second point well as well, but this will come later on. Okay? 1, 2, 3 is super important. We will see all of these very soon as we proceed. So technically, both are middlewares. The official definition in the end. You can call this the route handler because this is the last thing that responds to the request. So you can call this the route handler, but technically this is a middleware and even this is a middleware. An Express app is essentially a series of middleware calls. For example, if there is a person, they might first go to buy the ticket, then go to the ticket checker, and then actually hit the amusement park. So this is a middleware, this is a middleware, this is a middleware. A middleware can stop the request at any point. What were the few things it could do? End the request response cycle, which basically means the person can be just blocked here. You don't have enough money, go back home. You are not allowed to proceed further. I know you want to access this resource, but you don't have enough resources for it or enough money for it, so go back. Same thing can happen here. Okay, bhai, you have the money, but let's say the ticket checker is like, you don't have the perfect height to, or the perfect age to access this specific amusement ride. And for that reason, you have to go back as well. So there can be multiple reasons for each of the middlewares to kick the user out or tell them to go back home. And in this case, basically, this person is letting it through. So basically, what is the first middleware doing? It is calling the next middleware function in the stack, basically passing it on to the next guy. What is this one doing? It is ending the request response cycle and returning the response back to the user. Okay, you are not allowed to access the specific ride. In the best case, this guy will send it to the next guy. This guy will send it to the next guy. This guy will actually execute some code which translates to the user actually doing the ride, and then this guy will end the request response model, return back, bhai, theek hai, you've finally gotten what you wanted. As you can see, middlewares, especially chaining these middlewares, the high level goal is कि भाई you do something specific and then you do something specific, and then this is the final thing that the user wanted. But before they reach this logic, they have to go through a bunch of hoops. A good question you might ask at this point is, Harkirat, why don't I define all of this in a single middleware? Why can't the ticket checking, this ticket buying, ticket checking, and the amusement ride happen in the same one big function? Why do you have to separate these out into different middlewares? Great question. The reason for this is that middlewares can be reused. If you have this middleware defined once, if you have a single ticket creator, ticket seller, and a single ticket checker, these two can serve this guy, and this guy as well. If you have a real amusement park, will you create a separate ticket counter and a separate, you might create a ticket counter technically, sure, but like you can at least reuse the ticket buyer, right? The ticket seller, the person who's sitting in the front of the complete amusement park. You don't have to create a new one for every ride. You can have a single guy or woman in this case, and it's the responsibility to cut every ticket irrespective of what ride you're trying to access. So that's one middleware being reused. Similarly, this ticket checker can also be reused. You just have one job. You have to make sure whoever is trying to access either this ride or this ride or this ride, each of them have at least 14 years of age, or they have like 5 foot of height. Only then allow them, else block them. And if you define this logic separately, you can reuse them, very similar to how we've been seeing how you can reuse functions. This is good. This is bad. For every ride, you create a separate ticket buyer also and ticket checker also. And you basically have to hire so many employees. Versus in this case, you hire just 2 employees here who are able to handle the logic for all the rides. Cool. That's the high level. Let's codify this example. Let's see what this looks when you finally convert this into code. This is too big of a code to look at immediately. So let's go to Replit and let's try to write this code from scratch slowly and try to build up to this big code base. Cool. I would urge you at this point to go to Replit and create a new Node.js REPL. You can also write the same code base locally if you understand npm commands by now. Let's create a simple Express app and let's create a single route there called the ride one route. All right, I have created a single route. Right now, this route can be accessed directly by someone. There are no middlewares, trying to block or protect this route. This is an open route. If I actually run this and try to go to /ride1, you will see I get back this message. We'll see that very soon. As soon as this succeeds, I would urge you to write this code on your side as well. And I'm hoping this is simple code as long as you're writing the complete thing, which I didn't, but now I did. Let's run it. I also need to add an app.listen at the end. And now I have this URL. If I go to /ride1, you will see it says message, you have successfully ridden ride 1. This is great. There is just one problem here. There are no checks that are happening. We are never checking ki haan bhai, is this person of a certain age? Has this person actually paid? Things like these. Let's introduce that next. Let's introduce a function that will return a boolean. Returns a boolean if the age of the person is more than 14. Let's say this ride is only for people who have at least 14 years of age. So how would you write this function? You would write something like this. If age is greater than equal to 14, return true, else return false. Cool. You have written this function. Now what can you do? You can add an if check here at the top. If the user is old enough, and let's say we're expecting the user to send us their age as a query parameter. If the user is old enough, then do this. Else, send them a message that says that has a bad status code. So let's say 411. And a message that says, sorry, you are not of age yet. All right. What have I done? Simply defined a function yet. No middleware logic, nothing too complicated. A simple function. And I've used that function to return to the end user, either that you've successfully ridden the ride or that you're not of age yet. If I now restart this application, it says, sorry, you're not of age yet. Let me send in an age query parameter, which is 30. And it says, you have successfully ridden the ride. Let's make the age 10. And it says, sorry, you're not of age. This age is what gets caught here in rec.query.age, which is why this isOld function is working as it's supposed to. And we're able to send the user either this or this. Great. Now I ask you to introduce another ride called ride2. What will you do? You'll copy this. You will paste the whole code again. You'll just replace this with ride2 and say, ki, bhaiya, if the user is above the age of 14, then it's fine. You have successfully written ride2. Else this. Let's stop it. Let's restart it. And let's try to go to the /ride2 endpoint, which is exactly the same as the /ride1 endpoint. Both of them are using the isOldEnough function. If I go to /ride2, it says you're not of age yet. If I give it an age of 30, it says you have successfully ridden the ride 2. Great. We have 2 endpoints, and it seems like we have a ticket checker as well that is doing its job correctly. This is one way to introduce a ticket checker, but a better way is a middleware. Let's see how the syntax changes and why the other syntax is better if you're trying to do the same thing via middlewares. All right, I have defined another function here called isOldEnough middleware, and it takes 3 inputs: the request object, the response object, and next. Request and response we have seen before. Next is something new. Let's go back to the definition of middlewares, the official Express definition. What does it say? Express is a routing and middleware web framework that has minimal functionality on its own. An Express application is essentially a series of middleware function calls. Middleware functions are functions that have access to request, response, and the next middleware function in the application's request response cycle. Now, do we understand where next comes from? Express literally says कि भाई every middleware, which is literally everything, this function, this function, this function, or if you look at the code, this function that I've defined here, or this handler function, or this handler function all actually have access to a third argument called next. We don't really need it in the last route, which is why we've never written it here, but I could write it here, and if need be, use it as well. Most of the times you will not need it, which is why we haven't written it here. The middleware, however, is not the last function call. It is the thing that sits here or here. It is not the final thing that the user is trying to access. These guys do need access to the next method. Calling the next method is what sends the request from this middleware to the next middleware. I repeat, calling this next function is what takes the control from here to the next middleware, and you don't have to write next of rec, res here. You don't have to pass anything from here to whatever the next handler might be. Express already handles that. Okay, haan bhai, this middleware will also have access to request, rest, and next. Whatever comes after this, which could be this or this, will also have access to this. Express takes care of it. All that you have to do here is, okay, if age is above a certain number, whatever your logic is, then let the user propagate to the next middleware. If not, then stop the request right here, which is similar to what we are doing in the slides here. Okay, this guy stops the request right here. Or if I go a slide above, if you don't have the money, the request stops right here, right? That is this guy. But if you do have access, then you call next. Question is, we have defined this middleware, haven't used it yet. Let's try to use it. The very big benefit of these middlewares is that your final route only needs to do what it was originally supposed to. What was this route's purpose? Okay, bhai, whenever control reaches here, let the user know that they have ridden a ride. Now this specific route handler, or this middleware you could say, because as I said, everything is a middleware here, can just focus on what it needs to do. If you look here, what is this guy's purpose? To ride the ride, right? Will this, when the person reaches here, will they again go through a check? Will whoever is sitting here operating the ride again check कि हाँ भाई, are you of age? No, right? This guy's purpose is कि हाँ भाई, when someone has reached here, make them ride throughout. That is exactly what this route handler is doing now, and same for this guy. All of these rides only need to worry about making the user go through the ride and not do any verification checks. Verification checks happen before, which is the purpose of this middleware. Question is, as you can see, this is still not being used. It's not completely yellow in color, which in code usually means that you have not used this function anywhere. How do you use it? Great question. To use it, what was the definition of express? Express is an express application is essentially a series of middleware function calls. I can just define the series here. Before this is called, this is the first middleware. This is this guy right here. And then whatever comes after is the next middleware, which is, this guy or this guy. So this is how you use middlewares. How do you define middlewares? It's just a function, but it's different from this is old enough function. This guy accepts age as an input. This guy has access to the request object, so can actually extract the age, const age equal to rec.query.age, and then do whatever logic it wants with it. We don't need this function anymore. And based on the age, it'll either call the next middleware or stop it right here. And these two guys are good enough. They're using the middleware. The middleware will do its thing, either stop the request or let it flow. Let's see if this actually works as expected. And is it giving us the same output that we were getting before we introduced a middleware and used a raw native function? Refresh. It says you have successfully written the ride to. What if the age is 10? It says, sorry, you are not of age yet. This logic is no longer in the route handlers. This logic has been delegated to the middleware, and the middleware is doing its thing. It basically means whenever you hit this request, where does control reach first? It reaches here कि अच्छा भाई ride 2 is being accessed. सबसे पहले number 1 control will reach here, and hence the check happens. And if the check succeeds, next gets called, control reaches here, and then you return back to the user this. Cool. That's a high level of how you would build a basic application using middlewares. There are 10 different sort of things that you can introduce here. For example, one is if you know a certain middleware needs to go on every route, then you just remove the middleware from all these individual calls and you call it on top. Okay, bhaiya app.use this. The whole app, please use this. This is the first middleware for this guy also and for this guy also. And if there's another route below this, for that guy also. That's one new way to introduce middlewares into each one of your routes. You can either define them individually or you can define an app.use at the very top. That's number one. Number two, the thing to keep in mind is app.use only triggers for all the endpoints below the app.use, which basically means if I added this logic here, then this middleware is no longer attached to this. It is only attached to this. So the order matters here. Where you introduce the middleware matters. If you introduce it here, then everything below it will first go through this and then reach here. Same for the route below. First go here, then go here. If you don't introduce this app.use, or if you introduce it at the end, let's say, then this is pretty much useless. Neither of these routes will actually use this middleware. We can actually confirm it if you want. Let me save this, stop this and rerun this. If I go here and send a small age, what does it say? It says you have successfully written the write to, even though the age is just 10. Why is that happening? Because this middleware is no longer being attached to this guy or this guy. Sorry. But if I paste it here, stop and rerun it, then you will notice the logic is working as expected. Cool. That's great context. I think at a high level, we understand this. Let's try to harden our concepts by actually solving the assignment for this week. So if you go to the slides, you will find a link to this week's assignment. I would urge you to, at this point, clone this repository locally. You can clone it via GitHub, or you can just click on the green button and download unzip it and open this project in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to do the same. I've opened the project in Visual Studio Code. Would urge you to do the same thing and proceed with me and write code. If you look at week 3 here, there is a folder called O1 middlewares, which is where all of our assignments for the middlewares part of this week are. So I would urge you to run a few commands in this terminal next. cd week 3 /o1-middlewares. So go into the o1-middlewares directory and then run npm install once to actually install all your dependencies. Happened very quickly for me because I had already done this. If you have not done this, then it will take some time. If you have already done this, then it will happen almost immediately. Make sure you're in the right folder, which is o1-middlewares in the terminal, and then you run this command. Cool. Let's look at the README for this week. The README says, this week is divided into a few parts. Let's look at the first one, middlewares. You have to create a few standard middlewares for your application. Okay. You have to create a middleware for logging the number of requests to a server. Sounds okay. We'll figure out what that is. And then another assignment and then another assignment. Let's start with the first one. You have to create a middleware for logging the number of requests on a server. Let's see what the code looks like. Some extra libraries here that I don't understand and you don't have to worry about. You actually don't need this. Const express equal to require express, const app equal to express. Done this a few times. A top level global variable called request count, which is initialized to 0. Interesting. You have been given an express server which has a few endpoints. Your task is to create a global middleware using app.use, okay, which will maintain a count of number of requests made to the server in the global request count variable. Does this sound straightforward? What does it say? You have already been given a few endpoints. 1, 2, 3. You don't have to touch those endpoints. Your task is to create a global middleware using app.use. What does global mean here? It means a middleware that will be used by this guy, and this guy. So I can simply do a app.use function rec res next. This. I have at least created a global middleware, which is the first thing it asks me to do, which will maintain a count of the number of requests made to the server in the global request count variable. What does this mean? Okay, by there is a global request count variable. The value of this thing should go up by 1 whenever a new request comes to the server. And when can I say a new request has come to the server? By if the control ever reached here, means a new request came to the server, right? Because I said, okay, bro, this endpoint, and this endpoint, all of you are going to use this middleware. So anytime a request is coming either here or here or here, first it will come here. We will increase the value of request count. Then we will call next, and then this control will reach to the respective routes. Just by adding this much code base, I can now keep track of the number of requests that have been sent to my server. This is great. This is one very important metric in backend to make sure your servers aren't getting overwhelmed. You want to keep track of how many people are hitting your servers, how often are they hitting them, the number of requests. And this is one way to do it. What is another way to do it? Another way is that, bhaiya, I will not define middleware. I will just put this at the top of every function. This is great, but what principle does this violate? What principle does this violate? This violates the dry principle. You are repeating the same code 3 times. This is not great. This is just increasing the number of lines of code. And this is also hard to keep track of if you have to ever change this logic. You will have to change it in 3 places. For that reason, you shouldn't do this. You should do something like this. Ki haan bhai, I am just going to do this once. App.use this specific middleware. Cool. That's the high level of how you would do the first assignment. Let's see if it actually works. You can either add a app.listen at the end and then try it. Let's do that also. I added an app.listen at the end. Let me run this Node.js application. How will I do that? Node o1-request count.js. Now if I go to one of these endpoints, let's say the /user endpoint, I'll go there once. /user, and I see name John. Request count should now have become 1. Control should have reached here at least once. Let me do it one more time. Now it should have become 2. Now let me hit the /request count endpoint, which as you can see just returns the global variable. Great. I can actually see what value sits here. If I go to this endpoint, what do you think the output will be? Will it be 2 or will it be something else? It will be 4. It should have been 3. I probably hit some other endpoint in the middle. But why is it 4? Because even this guy, before control reached here, it went here. So request count actually went up by 1, which is why it is not, 2. Let's say I hit it again. It's 5, 6. Now I hit the /user endpoint. Now it should have been 7. But if I refresh this, will it remain 7 or will it become 8? Why did it become 9? Something obvious I'm missing somewhere. Not use this. Request count 10, 11. Am I hitting localhost from somewhere else? 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I just hit it twice. 16, 17, 18, 19. Okay, works. So it is 19 right now. If I refresh, should have been 20. If I refresh, becomes 21 because even the request count endpoint, before it actually returns this, the value increments by 1. It is for the same reason. If you look at the tests, which you don't have to, but there is a test file, you can look at it if you want. There also you will see the tests test this specific functionality the same way. Cool. You don't have to test this locally, by the way. You can just remove this and make sure you're able to run npx jest./tests/o1-request count.spec.js. If you run this, it'll run a bunch of automated tests. And for me, it says 1 passed, 2 passed, which basically means everything is sorted. This assignment has been solved the right way. Let's move on to the second assignment. Again, feel free to take a screenshot, look at the code. This is the lines of code that I added. O2 rate limiter.js. This sounds interesting. It says rate limiter in the name. What is a rate limiter? Can you guess? It's basically if someone is trying to bombard your servers, which can totally happen, right? Someone might hit your servers very often, create a for loop to send requests to you. You want to prevent those requests. You want to throttle them. You want to tell them, bhai, you can only send one request a second or something like that. This is something similar. Let's look at the assignment. Again, don't need any of these. Const express, const app equal to express, and then a task. What does the task say? You have been given an express server which has a few endpoints. Your task is to create a global middleware, seems like the same as the last assignment, which will rate limit the requests from a user to only 5 requests per second. If a user sends more than 5 requests in a single second, the server should block them with a 404. Interesting. User will be sending in their ID in the user-id header. You will have been given a number of requests for user object to start off with, which clears every 1 second. Seems like they've done a lot of the work for us. Let's start from the top. It says create a global middleware. तो भाई simple. ये तो इन्होंने मुझे, they've told this many times. I know how to do this. App.use rec res next, and then this. I have created a global middleware. Doesn't do anything yet, but I have created it. If a user sends more than 5 requests in a single window, the server should block them with a 404. Now this is important. How will you keep track of how many requests a person has sent in a single second? Two things you have to do. If you had to just keep track of how many requests a person has sent, you could have just created a global object, which these guys have, number of requests for user. Let me just move this app.use below. I could have just had this, and then I could have just done ke bhaiya number of requests for user rec.headers of user-id, because it said that every user is sending their user ID in user-id in the header. So rec.headers of user-id plus. I could have just done something like this, equal to this thing +1, whatever. This way, I could have incremented it one by one, which is fine. I can maintain the count of requests. How do I maintain how many requests this person has sent in a single second? Thankfully, they have written the logic for that as well. They say, you have been given this object to start off with, which clears every 1 second. What is happening every 1 second? It is going back to an empty object. So this way, all I have to do is this, and then let's make this code slightly cleaner. First, I have to get who is this user. Const user ID equal to rec.headers of user-id. I get the user ID of the person who is sending the request, because it clearly says user will be sending their user ID in the request. If they don't send the user ID, means you can just ignore that request. They have said ke bhaiya the test suite, whoever is testing this will always send this. So I get that ID. And then I can first check ke bhai, does user number of requests for user of user ID exist? It basically means, is it 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, some number? If it does exist, what do I have to do? I have to increase it by 1. And if the number of requests are greater than 5, which means this is the 6th request, this is the 7th request, this is the 8th request in this 1 second, then what will I do? I will block it right there. I will, what does it say? Return them a 404. So I will just do res.status 404 dot whatever. You can send them whatever you want. No entry. But if that is not the case, then I will do what? Then I will allow it to flow to the actual route, because this is not the user hasn't yet hit their rate limits. What is the rate limit? Greater than 5. This is the rate limit. The user is not allowed to send more than 5 requests in a single second. The only thing is, why did I add this first logic? The answer is the object is initially empty. So what would number of requests for user of Harkirat be? It will be undefined. So I have to check, ke bhai, is this already initialized? And if not, I need to initialize it with 1. कि भाई ठीक है, this is the first request for Harkirat. So I am going to initialize this object. And of course, allow this request to flow through, because the first request in a second can flow through. But if this is the second request or the third request, then the control will reach here. We will increment कि हाँ भाई, this is the second request for the user, third request for the user. And then we check, has this user sent more than 5 requests? Is this the 6th request of the user? If that is the case, we send back a 404. Else we let the logic flow through. Cool. That's the high level of how I've solved this problem. You can change this code a little bit to make it slightly cleaner, but this is the most verbose way of solving it. Okay, bhaiya, has this user sent at least 1 request in this second? No. Then to bhaiya, this is the user's first request. Let me keep a track of that. And next to send this to the actual logic. But that is not the case. This is their second or their third or their fourth request. Then first increment it. Check if this is their 6th request or 7th request, then don't let it through, else let it through. The only question at this point you might have is, Harkirat, how is this clearing every 1 second? And the answer is this. Every 1 second there is a global clock that was thankfully just given to us. That is just reinitializing this to an empty object. And that way, all you have to do is, I know someone is going to clear this globally. I just have to keep track of, is this empty? And if it is, then initialize it with 1, else initialize it with this. What will happen if the user hits this, let's say? If the user hits this 6 times in let's say under 100 milliseconds, or like a very short span, what will happen? Control will reach here. First time it will reach here, and number of requests for that user will become 1. Second time it will reach here, and then number of requests will become 2. This condition won't be met. 2 is not greater than 5, and so the control will flow. The next time it will be 3, control will flow. It will be 4, control will flow. It will be 5, control will flow. It will be 6, the 6th request as soon as it comes in a single second, which basically means, this clear hasn't happened. Then the control will reach here and the user will get back a 404. That is how you can create a simple rate limiting middleware. Usually middlewares in the real world will be something of this sort only. They are helping you track these metrics. There will be of other types as well, but this is the easiest one to, get your hands dirty with, to write some logic that lets you limit a user. Why is this beautiful? This is very beautiful because now a single user cannot bombard your servers, provided you have logic to actually extract the user ID and people are legitimately sending you their user ID. In the real world, this is usually done through IP checks. You basically, check for the user's IP and block a certain IP, allow only 100 requests per second from a certain IP, things like these. But this is a great start. Let's try to test it and see if it works as expected. How will you do that? npx jest 02 rate-limiter.spec.js. If you run it, all tests have passed, which means things are looking good. Great. That's the second one. Let's look at the third one. What does it say? Error count. Now comes a new type of middleware, which we introduced in the live class, but I didn't introduce today. The error middleware. What does this say? You have been given an Express server which has a few endpoints. Your task is to, number 1, ensure that if there is ever an exception, the end user sees a 404 status code. Maintain the error count variable, whose value should go up or down every time there is every time there is an exception on the server. So let's start with the first one. Firstly, let's start with what is an error middleware and how you, even before, what is an error? What is this exactly right here? You might remember I introduced try catch a little bit. Oh, I did it? No, I did not. That's the next video. An error is basically something like this. If I try to access, if I do a const a equal to const a, don't define it, don't give it a value, which basically makes a undefined. Let a. Then I try to do a dot length. JavaScript will throw an error here. What does throwing an error mean? It means that JavaScript will be like, stop, I cannot proceed further. And JavaScript will give you a very big error message that something bad has happened here. So I'm going to stop execution of this program right here. This is okay. This is great, but this is not great for an Express application. If an error is ever thrown, either like this is one way to throw an error. Okay, you try to access something that doesn't exist, or you can simply use this syntax that I'll just show, which is throw new error and then whatever error message you want to give. This will do the exact same thing as, you trying to access a.length where a does not exist. And why is this cool? This is cool because, well, this is not cool. This is bad for a few reasons. Let me show you the reason. Let me start this Express server. Let me add an app.listen at the end. And then let me try to start this server and try to hit this specific endpoint that's throwing an error. I get back a very big error message. This your end user is seeing. This is your end user. If you have built an application, they can actually see this exception. They can see, acha, this is this user's machine, /user/key/project/analytics steps. This is really bad. You want to protect all of these messages. You don't want these to come out, which is why, as you can see, the first one says, ensure if there is an exception, the end user sees a status code of 400. Right now, what status code are they seeing? What is the default status code that Express returns if the control never reaches a rest or something? If there is just an exception thrown, the default status code that you will see is 500. What is the assignment? Make it 400. How can you do it? There are a few ways. The way that is expected here is by adding a new type of middleware called the error middleware. All of this you will see in the official Express definitions. If you go to Express middleware, if you search that, if you scroll to the very end, you'll see a bunch of examples here, by the way, if you want to practice more. But at the end, you will see error handling middlewares. Error handling middlewares take 4 arguments. You must provide, does not matter. Point is defining an error. Point is, okay, this is not enough information here, but what is an error handling middleware? The name itself says error handling middleware, which means anytime there is an exception being thrown, anytime you're doing something dumb like this, let a equal to nothing, and then, a.length, let b equal to a.length. What will this do? You try to access a dot length when a itself is not defined. How do I know a is not defined? If you define a variable like this and don't give it a value, this happens. You can also be like, okay, let a equal to, empty array. And then you can be like a of 0 dot length. That is also an error. A of 0 is undefined. Dot length will throw an exception. Either one of these cases, you do something dumb. You be like a equal to 1. Then you try to do a dot length 2. Try to access something on something that's not an object. Then an error will be thrown. You don't have to explicitly throw an error like I was doing before. Even this will throw an exception. If I go here and refresh this page, you will see it says cannot read properties of undefined. So what does this tell you? It tells you that bhaiya, this is very bad way to show the end user some exception. And this is an error that's being thrown. What are we adding now? Error handling middleware. Okay, bhai, anytime there is an error, this middleware that you define now at the end of your file, I repeat, you define the error handling middleware at the end of your file, and it looks similar to a normal middleware, only it takes 4 arguments: er, rec, res, next. Rec, res, next we understand. What is er? It is you get access to the error that was actually thrown. Here, the error that is thrown translates to, this text right here. It has a bunch of things inside: the error message, the stack trace, a bunch of other things. That is what you get access to here. You don't really need it, but at a high level, you get access to it, and you get access to the standard request, response, and next. And Express by default doesn't send a 500 status code, which is what it is doing right now. By default, if there is an exception ever that is being thrown, Express is like, bhaiya, exception is thrown. I am going to tell the end user, yellow G, this is the exception, and there you go, 500 status code. This is bad. If you add an error handling middleware, which I just did, then Express will be like, okay, I am not going to send the standard 500 status code. I will wait for Harkirat or whoever has written this error handling middleware to finally respond back to the user. And that is what you have to do here. You have to send whatever status code you want, which in our case, you can send an empty object. In our case, the assignment itself says standard status code of 404. So that is what I'm doing here. So what was the assignment? It was, this change you don't have to do. I'm going to revert it. Some error. But this was the assignment. Okay, number 1. Let me copy this over to the end. Ensure that if there is an error exception, the end user sees a status code of 404. I have done that. Okay, anytime there's an error, control will reach here. This will handle sending the user a 404 status code. Maintain the error count variable whose value should go up every time there is an exception. Hope that is clear. What was the first one? Maintain a request count. Make its value go up anytime there is a request coming in. What is this one? Okay, there is a global variable called error count. It should go up anytime there is an exception. And that's how you can add that. If I now, let's just run a few tests, right? So I'm going to remove the app.listen and just going to test it. This was the expected solution here. And if I run npx jest./test/o3, you will see all the errors have passed, all the tests have passed. How did that happen? I did what the assignment asked me to do. Number 1, ensure if there is an exception, 404 is returned. Number 2, maintain the error count variable whose value should go up every time there is an exception, which is happening right here. Cool. This was assignment 1, 2, 3. Again, very simple 3 lines of code here. But the goal was this is not 3 lines of code. This one was slightly bigger. The goal at a high level was you understand how to write middleware, standard middlewares that you use. One middleware we haven't written yet is the authentication middleware, which we will as we reach the assignments, probably the 3rd assignment here. Cool. That's all for this one. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.